what we will be presenting today is more for discussion, in the sense that it is at the framework level rather than having indicators completely fleshed out. And what we are trying to do both in this session as well as in the group activity which will follow will be to get inputs from the various teams on what these indicators could be, the correctness of the framework, etc. But before we begin, a quick summary of what has already been talked about in the earlier sessions is that our projects are very diverse because we are not focused on one particular sector or one pathway, right? Like for instance, tech for improving FLL. So we don't have that very specific definition. So our projects span sectors and intervention pathways. And in some cases, we also have a mix of projects where we have a lot of visibility for the next couple of quarters, which can help us prepare OKRs and all. And in some cases, we don't have that visibility. So the question is, how do we come up with some kind of a measurement framework which is sharp enough to actually throw some meaningful numbers on success, but which is not so straight-laced that it can't fit the variety of projects that we have. So that's what we want to cover. And another important use case for this, particularly from the Telangana context, is that projects start off with certain objectives. But once you kind of move through a few quarters, there are different things that get added on, many things that get removed. So it's hard for us to assess whether we are even like working with the same animal, right? I mean, it's like the ship of Theseus. So there is so much which is displaced that we can't even identify the original animal. So hopefully something of this sort will also help us keep a guidance on this is what we want to achieve. One important rider here is that we are not trying to, in this session, come up with one single number for project outcomes or project success. We are not sure if that's something we should do even in the long term, but at any rate, we are not trying to do that now. But it is to say, this is a set of metrics which will be relevant across our different project types in our portfolio. And this is the subset of these metrics which might lend itself to quantification. So that way we are looking at both quantitative and qualitative, and we are not trying to aggregate everything into a single framework. And as Parul will talk about later, we are also trying to see to what extent we can embed these frameworks into the workstation itself, so that it's not just a framework, but something which the project managers can work on. So I think most of us know about the log frame, but still, we'll talk about this again because it is not very easy to impose log frames on some of our more short-term tactical projects. So, for instance, if there is a 2-week engagement where we are asked to chart a economic transformation roadmap for Telangana, I don't know how easy it will be to put that down on a log frame, right? So, what we'll be trying to do here may not be kosher in the sense of how very project-specific interventionists look at log frames, but it's somewhere in between. So the objective is not like quantification for the purposes of quantification. So please feel free to intervene wherever you feel that some metrics might be overthinking, might not be relevant to us at this point of time, etc. Both right now as well as a part of your group work session. So I'll kind of let you in for half a minute on how we are planning the group work. The idea is to have us into, let's say, 2 or 3 groups, each of which will assume the position of a state unit. So the groups will then have to identify any 2 or 3 projects which are relevant to the CEGIS theory of change. And for these 2 or 3 projects, come up with one slider summary of what the success metrics and what the ROI indicators will be. And also to think of what could be some synergies across the projects. So let's say that you take a couple of projects which are in the scope of supportive supervision. So there, even if one project gets roadblocked for some reasons, there could be synergies in looking at the other project. So just to reiterate that this entire framework as well as the metrics which compose it are very much up for this. So this is something which Parul will be covering in greater detail and also walking through for the ECD project. But the reason why we have this here is with particular reference to success metrics. the governance focused TOC that we have presents at least one problem, right, apart from all its merits, which is, do we consider improvements in governance as outcomes or as intermediate outcomes or outputs? Because if you take a citizen centric approach, then any impact which can be measured at the citizen level is the only thing which deserves to go into outcomes. But if we operate on a hypothesis that improving governance will improve service outcomes at a citizen level, then we can even consider improvements in state capacity as our final outcomes. So what we are trying to do is, in our success framework, capture both of these. Mainly focus on the last mile outcomes, but also have some aspects of state capacity baked into our definitions of success. And hopefully this will also let us over time understand whether improvements in governance are actually causing improvements in outcomes at the citizen level. So, yeah.
After it.
Sure. So, but this is a point where we also wanted to, in the middle of the session, we'll have several questions for KM and Vijay as well. Because since this is a framework which is under progress, whether this is consistent with what we are trying to do is something we want to understand.
The idea is not just to identify if there's success at the project level, right? That's easy to fake. Compliance can be taken as outcome, especially when they're long-term outcomes. The idea is to figure out how the org success can be defined. Are we aggregating project level success into org success? Are we defining org level indicators and then distributing them across projects and therefore identifying irrespective whether certain projects fail, whether the org is successful? So when we divide you into units, the idea for giving you a state level unit or to create that is to treat the state as a the state engagement as a microcosm of CEGIS, right? So look at it not just from the perspective of how your 3 projects may have succeeded, but how that contributes or whether or not it contributes to the state level or the unit level success. I think that's one important point.
Again, as a subset of whatever we are going to capture in the log frame, we thought of putting down what are some metrics which could capture ROI for us. So here we are looking at a combination of financial metrics which can be converted into financial, metrics which can be quantified but are not necessarily financial, and qualitative metrics. So that's the combination which we'll walk through. So the first piece is on the points of incidence, right? Because we'll need to make sure that we capture both costs and benefits across all of the players in our ecosystem. So the ones which are very easily apparent are CEGIS, government, and maybe citizens. But within government also we need to have a disjunction as to whether we are looking at government as an institution or whether we are looking at the functionaries, the staff in the government. And as a part of our work around revenue as well as jobs and productivity, it's also possible that there will be significant spillovers, positive or negative, to the economy. So for instance, on taxation, it's pretty evident, right? On one side you could enhance collection of taxes, but it might have greater than proportionate negative effect on the economy. So these are the areas that we will need to be cognizant of even when we are proposing the project. So the idea is to say, okay, this is the overall framework for ROI. Which of these boxes are relevant to my project? Which of these boxes are positive, or rather expected to be positive? And which of these boxes are expected to be costs? So that's very simply put what we are trying to do here. So under financial, we have cash outflows and inflows. We also have time value of money. Like for example, in the Raitu Bandhu HFM study, it can be argued by the government, but that whatever benefits which were transferred to the beneficiaries would have been eventually transferred. But particularly for citizens, it makes a big difference as to whether you get your money today or whether you get your money 1 month down the line. So, and similarly, when we are looking at amnesty schemes on tax, again, it could be argued that sometime in the future all these monies will be collected. But again, what is important is the time value of money. We are also looking at the change in allocation that happens because of our interventions. Allocations either at a government level or at a household level or even within the private sector. So for instance, if through an intervention in the power sector, we are able to kind of convince that pricing of water needs to be incorporated into the agri ecosystem, that could lead to an economy-wide level of reallocation of resources, which is something we want to capture. And finally, income and economic output leveraging this. Yeah, there are some indicators which are not financial per se, but which can be converted to financial metrics. So the first is on resource allocation, and here in particular we are looking at staff time. So any savings in staff time or any extra footprint that our interventions are costing on staff time. We can convert that into financial costs by simply multiplying it with the staff salaries. So that's one part of resource utilization. The other part of the resource utilization is also on physical assets, because particularly in our work around procurement and on projects which involve rehabilitate, operate and transfer kind of projects, there enhancing the utilization of assets which are already there itself could be a significant net benefit. We are also looking at metrics around reduction of risk, right? So, for instance, I mean, one example is around infrastructure, where again we have cost and time overruns, which contribute to risk and which can be quantified as well. But even in other sectors, reduction of risk is something we want to include. And finally, there are some sectoral outcomes which have multipliers. Now, it's not clear as to whether these multipliers are globally relevant or even locally relevant in the states or contexts that we operate in. But if there are some, it also offers an opportunity to do a financial conversion. Under the non-financial metrics, we have sectoral outcomes, which will be stated just as the delta and outcomes, and proxies for state capacity. Here we are really looking, again, this is where the definition can be the most open, but right now we could think of it in terms of state capacity by way of people competencies or by way of strength of processes, which will include processes for decision making, and this is where a lot of our work on improving quality of data and data use will also come. Then we have perception of satisfaction. And by the way, whatever I'm talking about might be relevant across multiple heads, right? So we'll need to capture it wherever it's relevant. And finally, any public goods that we generate by way of common data sets or reports, etc., will also come under the non-financial metrics. Yeah. Finally, we also, I mean, these are not really outcomes per se. That's the disclaimer here. But this is more in view of efficiency, right? Because when we work across multiple projects in our portfolio, to what extent are we able to learn from our previous projects and de-risk our future projects? So again, this is not something which probably donors will be interested in, but it's of interest to us, right? Because it helps us be more efficient. So which is on reduction in time and effort on any intermediate outputs or templatizable outputs that we create. Contextual understanding of systems at a local level that reduce risk. And here we are talking about implementation sensitivities, understanding how particular bureaucrats work. That could also be a learning from project to project. And finally, improve coordination across departments. That is, if we are able to work with a few departments and kind of strengthen relationships and demonstrate success, to what extent does it make it that much easier for us to approach them again with different proposals?
Yeah, so even the sectoral outcomes, okay, at some level, I think one of the things that academic research tries to do is try to then quantify the returns to that in terms of overall ROI. See, because at some level, if you're a finance department trying to make allocations across sectors, in an ideal world, you should have a sense of what is the marginal return of an extra rupee spent in sector X versus sector Y in specific program. Normally, we don't have that, okay, we don't do that. But a big part of what the research is trying to do is then saying, if you improve, say, child malnutrition, and based on studies that have tracked outcomes for 30 years, 40 years, you're able to calculate this present discounted value in terms of wages and income. Here are certain additional things. So anyway, so I think it's possible even for sectoral outcomes to be financialized.
Yeah, so that's what is the sectoral outcomes with multipliers. In cases we don't have multipliers, we'll be looking at just.
See, so that's, yeah, so and exactly, right? And then, so the thing is, if you apply your mind hard enough, most sectoral outcomes can be quantified. So here is a way to think about it, right? So don't think about this as, okay, am I being crass in trying to put a monetary value to something that's intrinsic? In the end, a finance department still has to make a decision, okay, about where am I going to put my money. So you need some metric, right? So suppose you're saying water, okay, we brought clean water and we've invested in clean water, and you can quantify the time savings in terms of time to collect water. You can quantify the health benefits. You can quantify a bunch of things, and it'll be possible. So in almost every sector, I think we should push ourselves to think about, is it possible to quantify this? And see, because I think there is a lot of bully-headed thinking, right? I mean, in the development space, that says, because I have good intentions, you should do this, okay? And in many, many cases, the kind of project that will get designed is often not high ROI, okay? Like so, but in that same project, in that same goal, there'll be multiple ways of doing it. So in fact, like I said in my talk yesterday, if you guys came, right? I mean, that there are two ways of doing this. One is to say, how do I do budgetary allocation across sectors?
Correct.
Okay, so for that, you need a financialized ROI, which is often very difficult.
Correct.
But you can start, it's easier to say, how do I do efficiency within a sector? Because here are 10 ways of achieving a certain goal, and I can show you that this is more effective than this. Okay, so that's one. Second thing on your fourth slide is you made this passing comment that these organizational things are something that funders will not be interested in. That's not true, because I think any funder actually cares not just about, again, the nobility of your mission, but the capacity of your to deliver that in an effective way. So a learning org that is actually very quickly compressing its own delivery cycles, right, is an incredibly important aspect, right, that we aspire to both internally and externally. So those are just like two minor tweaks I want to say.
So Karthik, just to respond to them, I think one is that, I mean, one issue is that some of the outcomes that we're talking about, especially the citizen level outcomes, have a very, very long gestation period, which means that quantifying them in the near term is almost impossible, but we can't delay the decision of whether the project is successful to 5-6 years, right?
So
That's
hence
one.
hence the intermediate.
Correct.
So I agree. That I
Yeah,
agree.
yeah.
That I don't disagree about.
I mean, the second thing also, frankly, I mean, the allocation across sectors or across programs at the end of the day a very political decision, which is why it's left to the house of the people. But your point is well taken. I think we will try and, to the extent possible, have a unified metric for some of these things, but that may not always be possible.
So, a few pieces that are not very clear to us at this point of time, where we'll be seeking inputs from the larger team as well as from KMPP, is on the following areas. So, the first one is on comprehensiveness, which is more of a concern for the respective teams, because it's important that you've thought through both the costs and benefits, because this ROI orientation, in a sense, our incentives are to capture the benefits very comprehensively, but we should also make sure that we are careful enough on the cost side. Because, for instance, a lot of interventions that we are suggesting on data capture, data quality improvement, at least in the near term, will have time costs from the functionaries themselves, which will have to be, which will be justified later. But that's on comprehensiveness. The second piece is on attributability, and this is something which we will struggle with, irrespective of which framework we put in, because it can always be argued that control is non-existent, etc. And given that we are not completely into RCTs.
No, that's fine. See, there's a reason land who kind of like rails against RCTs is happy with me.
Right.
Like, because it's RCT plus plus plus. So it's fine.
The biggest fan is sitting in front of you.
Lands Pritchard's. I mean, yeah, I mean, sure. I admire him. Let's just call it. I admire him. Yes.
The other point is on additivity versus substitution, and this is something which will need to be thought through even during the project approval stage internally, right? Because we may actually generate a high ROI, but it's possible that there is already somebody in the ecosystem who would have done that. And this will be of a lot of concern to our donors as well. Where are we adding value rather than displacing existing supply? I think as a part of the project proposal forms, there is also a space where we are inviting teams to think through this and justify as to why this is additive and not substitutive. The important pieces are here. So what is going to be the time horizon for your projection, right? Because particularly with state capacity, we can argue that this is going to be for perpetuity, and that way any intervention will justify itself because of purely the time involved. But what is a reasonable time frame? Do we conservatively assume, let's say, a period of 3 years or 5 years till the current dispensation is around? That is something that needs thought, and this might also not be standard across interventions, right? Because interventions which have policy implication that is sensitive for the government might be a lot more amenable to being retracted when compared to administrative changes that we are making, which are not so visible to citizens. So that's an area where we need a bit more nuance.
And actually, that actually aligns with what Devashish was saying, right? Some outcomes will take time to realize. So, and we can't really keep measuring those. One way is that we'll say even after we have withdrawn or we have handed over the project, you'll keep doing admin data analysis to figure out, where you stand and what were the longer term outcomes. But then the teams need to be consciously focusing around it. So even that would also primarily apply to those kind of projects like ECD, education and stuff.
Yeah, and I think the sustainability question is a very hard one. So right
Exactly.
now I'm perfectly happy to focus just on ROI of our interventions, right? I mean, and then we can think about what, have we managed to figure out something that generates ROI and then figure out what is the right model of sustainability.
Yeah.
No, but even for ROI, Karthik, let's say that we are accumulating returns, you'll be doing it over a period, right? So what should that period be? So let's say that we have put in place processes which will be able to check and improve the quality of administrative data. Do we then assume that this will sustain for 3 years, 5 years, 20 years? So that's an important question as well.
Fair enough. I'll take it. I mean, I think so it's good that you're pushing the thinking on things like this, and
We'll figure it out.
Let's not be overly optimistic. So one more addition to that.
And by the way, let me say this, okay? We may conclude after this exercise that trying to get too granular with this
Correct.
is a mistake. Okay?
Correct.
And that we may just want to use high-level rules of thumb. And that's
Yeah.
completely fine. Okay?
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
see, an entity like GiveWell, okay, that evaluates charities, right? I mean, one of the things that they do. Sorry, if you want me to use the mic. So it's completely possible that if you want to get really granular about this, okay, then you'll get stuck in an analysis paralysis loop, and that is not our job. Okay, so there are entities like GiveWell, okay, that are doing that level of granularity of interventions because they are trying to direct hundreds of millions of philanthropic dollars, and part of their USP is that we have pressure tested every micro assumption on these kind of, and they also focus on a very simple metric, okay, which is kind of cost per life saved, okay, and which is why, in fact, if some of you came to Michael Kramer's talk, the thing. It's a 2-minute detour, but you'll see why it's connected to the challenge of measurement. Okay, it's because GiveWell, because of this multidimensionality problem, they kind of said that the only metric we are going to use is dollars per life saved. Okay, so for an intervention to meet the GiveWell kind of even be in their endorsed charity list, you need to have impact on life saved. Okay, so the challenge that Michael was kind of trying to overcome here was that if you look at studies on water, okay, on clean water, what happens is that because mortality is such a low frequency outcome, you can very rarely have enough statistical power in a study to get effects on mortality. Okay, so most water studies are statistically powered to detect effects on diarrhea, okay, on intermediate outcomes like diarrhea. Okay. And so there was enough evidence from water studies and understanding that it's good, it reduces diarrhea, reduces blah blah blah, but there was no significant effect on mortality. That's because each individual study was too small of a band. Okay, so as a result, despite the importance of water, it wasn't on the GiveWell list of charities because you couldn't actually show impact on mortality. So what Michael and team did was put together and contact the authors of each of these individual studies, get the original data, pool it all and do the right kind of meta-analysis, and then find that once you aggregate all of this data, you get a significant 30% impact on mortality, and then suddenly it jumps up on GiveWell's threshold of this is something to do. So I'm using that as a discussion of how kind of the cutting edge of international philanthropy is working, that is bringing this kind of, the discipline of effective altruism, okay, into the philanthropic space. Okay, so Indian philanthropy to बहुत basic stage पे है, right? It's gone from building temples to building schools. Okay, which is one gentle step in the right direction. But अभी तो दूर की बात है, right? So I'm not pushing us to get into that level of granularity, and because we are multidimensional, then by definition, it'll be a mistake for us to say we're going to come back and only do things that you can quantify life save. But at the same time, as kind of an org that can get so easily sucked into doing tactical things on demand from government, all I want is to impose a certain amount of discipline, like in project selection, okay, that says if this is successful, what is the size of the win we are talking about? Is it a win in terms of and we've talked about this, right? So processes, time savings, different kinds of efficiencies. So for me, and I think one way I feel optimistic, okay, that state capacity interventions can be quantified is if you do time use studies, okay, and if you do a time use study pre-post, okay, that you don't need an RCT for that because there's not like omitted variables that are massively driving this, okay. So if you took the Panchayati Raj study and saying this was our prior analysis, Anganwadi, this is where the time is going, and then what our intervention has done is we have just kind of reduced the inefficiency in the time use, okay. Like, I mean, so yesterday that's what Sridhar was saying, right? That, for example, we know the nutrition literature has done Hajar studies, okay, to know that a key part of child nutrition is complementary feeding, okay. That 6 months, after 6 months of exclusive breastfeeding, is the child getting like 2 cups of solid food, okay. And you just need an Anganwadi worker to go to the household to coach the mothers, and the evidence shows that you do this once in 6 months, this happens, okay. But in the data, despite the ICDS, despite everything, only about 12 to 15% of households have ever been visited by anybody, Anganwadi, Asha, A&M put together, okay. So there's that massive gap. So if we are able to take in the context of an ICDS project, even if you don't show impacts on nutrition, if you're able to say, listen, here is where the time use was, and here is our intervention that has streamlined this, and just multiply that. If you save 10% of time from pointless administrative work, multiply that by the number of people and the salaries, and that's a lower bound, right? Because you're taking the fiscal cost as opposed to the benefit. So I think in many state capacity interventions, I think the time saved and those kind of intermediate metrics is a perfectly acceptable metric of success. Okay?
Yeah.
So
No, we completely agree. And I think one thing that we want project teams to internalize is this culture of measurement from the very beginning, starting from the design stage. We know we may be working with, say, we are piloting solutions with 50 people or 100 households. It doesn't matter. Like, measure everything. You never know how you will end up using it in future, because these are all longer term interventions, right? From design, it will move to prototype, it will move to pilot, solution. But all this data is really useful. And if we have access to it, that will eventually help us in doing these calculations and understanding things better.
No, but so on that parallel, I think one of the problems, Karthik, is this is where the disjunction between the org level and the project level success happens, right? So if you say let's focus only on the project, right? You do a pilot exercise, you do an RCT, whatever micro RCT, etc., you find that it is successful. For you, it's a successful project if you don't take into account what came of it. If we leave aside sustainability, right? Now the point is, if that does not translate into institutionalization policy change, it's a failed project. But at the org level, because you now have a model you can put somewhere else, for the moment you suspend decision or judgment in terms of whether it was a org success or not.
And that's completely fine, which is why in the knowledge session, what I'll talk about is that see, again, for a young org, right? I think it is completely fine for projects to fail as long as we learn.
Right.
Every project succeeds, we're not taking enough risk. Okay,
Yeah.
so definitely things will fail, but the important thing, and that's absolutely fine. Like,
Yeah.
is what are the generalizable principles we're taking from this that then allows us to. And of course, all of this is hypothetical and speculative, right?
Yeah.
But if we're able to say that based on this learning, right, the next time we went, we were able to kind of avoid all of these mistakes. These are, at the end of the day, right? Even donor decisions, all of these is there. Like an entity like OMPACT, they're very holistic, right? Most of their funding decisions, the RCT helps, okay, but that's just a small part of it. So their kind of org due diligence when they come and look at a system change grant is they spend months on the ground, right? Looking at the org processes, looking at talking to the stakeholders. So they also have, right? And so I think all of these are good, but the important thing is to discipline ourselves to document it and to kind of discipline and permeate the thinking, right?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's like even internally it was a very split jury, so it was a fun process in coming up with this.
No, I think for some reason I felt the last comment was pointedly made towards me.
No, but we are actually seeing some of this, right? So the system diagnostic we did in ECD took us like 6 to 7 months. Here when we did it in Bodoland, it took us 3 months.
Correct.
Right? And then we are aiming that the diagnostic we'll do in Tamil Nadu for education will take 2 months. I hope I'm not getting the numbers wrong. But we are learning in that entire process, right? Our diagnostic first was very spread out, right? We wanted to cover everything. Now it's becoming more targeted.
Yeah.
That's also the learning that we are getting from the state teams, that okay, when your objective is very clear, why do you want to spread yourself and measure everything, right?
Exactly.
So, all those learnings also need to be, we are documenting them, but we can be more efficient about it, I think.
Just more kind of deliberate and thoughtful.
Exactly,
about
cognizant.
it.
Yeah.
So, and that's, see.
So,
Thank you very much.
oh, sure.
For the recordings.
this whole thing's been really interesting because at ID Insight in 2016, there was like a very similar summit where they set up a lot of org things about ID Insight's growth from 50 to 150 or 200, and one of the things was actually exactly this, was these OKRs. And initially the system looked kind of similar to what you're proposing, and then at the end, it was, I think, really hard for management to kind of enforce project teams to come up with hard numbers. And it reduced to more of a stoplight system, which I think in the end was effective. And I think actually for the people that had had the experience trying to do it the hard way of like getting to the ROIs, there was like a little more grounding. And because everyone, when the team meetings would happen to debate the social impact, you know, like 1 out of 5, which is of course kind of a crazy concept. These meetings would last forever because I think a bunch of people, you know, we were young, we're excited. So like 2 hours debating like, did, you know, Harpic for latrines in Bihar have social impact? And yeah, I think like I actually do think like having this ROI mindset might have like helped some of those discussions, but I do think it takes like a lot of org discipline, or I'm not exactly sure how to do it, but I guess like I was part of an org where sort of this was implemented in this like more quantitative way, and just there wasn't like, I think it was received as like too much of a burden or too difficult to compare, you know. If teams weren't doing it the same way, like I think that was the thing, like it's like these bureaucrats not really trusting the underlying admin data integrity. I think the partners didn't have confidence that like the different regions were calculating these scores in a comparable enough way that the ROI coming out of one project team was really comparable to the ROI coming out of another project team, and they sort of gave up and were like, you know what, we'll do stoplights, red, yellow, green. So yeah, I guess just like things to think about.
Yeah, I mean, the good thing is, I think they didn't have Paru, who
Getting recorded. On record, you're bullying me.
Yeah, so a couple of points on the more qualitative aspects, I mean, on both interest in sustaining whatever interventions we are imposing, and also on perception, because one important piece here is that we may, according to our time use studies, say that the time footprint has come down by, let's say, 1 hour a day, etc. But it's quite possible that functionaries feel very differently. But we need to make sure that we incorporate that as well. Because even in PRRD, originally it was 150 plus fields, but it was 150 plus fields which nobody was filling, compared to, let's say, 80 fields which everybody has to fill. So it's actually an increase in burden. So we need to think of that as well. So yeah, on the point, one final XKCD is, yeah. So we just want to make sure that this doesn't become like too high stakes. So that's the reason why we're not trying to create like one composite index out of it, nor use it for any like high stakes decisions.
Yep.
The idea is to see what data comes through this, and over the midterm try and figure out if any internal KPIs can be made out of this. And I hope that approach is fine with the leadership as well, because right now it's a too raw and untested a stage for any high stakes.
Yeah, let me. No, this is great. See, I think that I just, you know, like, and I'm really glad Stephen's here and, you know, making sure we don't repeat those mistakes of, you know, over calculating. And I think it's always an art and science, right? You want to, so, but here's one way to motivate the macro conversation, right? Which is to say that as a state lead, okay, so let's think about the funding streams, okay, over time, right? Mean that again, as we're entrepreneurial, right? Mean that over time it has to be self-sustaining in terms of making the case for the value of what we deliver, okay? So essentially, imagine as a state lead, okay, that through some combination of CSR and some combination of local state level philanthropy, okay, of people who care deeply about the state, that, you know, that after 3 years, 5 years, okay, state leads are partly in charge, okay, of kind of maintaining that, at least a part of the stream of funding, okay. So the question is, what conversation are you going to have with those people, right? And so just even forcing yourself to think in those terms. See, there are a number of non-profits, like, you know, I've talked to people who work for non-profits, like, I mean, ये सब काम किया, फिर funding खत्म हो गया, like, I mean, और plus disband हो गए, right? So the question is, funding क्यों कम हुआ? Like, you know, because after all, this was somebody who cared enough about your project to fund you. So if the funding stopped, it meant you were not doing your job in terms of convincing the donor that this was a good continued use of money. Right? Now, sometimes funding khatam hota hai for political reasons, DFID or USAID or some funder will change some priorities, and that's fine. Okay, but often your first funders are your biggest allies, correct? They want you to succeed, right? So if your first funder is not willing to kind of continue or kind of make the calls to kind of get people, then that means you're not doing something right. Okay, so essentially what I want to say is, just because we're in the business of doing good doesn't mean that no, like somebody said, the most corporate jobs are boring. Okay, and they're boring. And I remember a friend once telling me in the context of why is a PhD worth it even if you take an 80% cut in lifetime income. It's because the world does not owe you an intellectually stimulated livelihood. Okay, the most jobs converge to boredom. Okay, and so which means that if you want to sustain an enterprise where you get both intrinsic satisfaction and the ability to deliver impact, we have to have the discipline of quantifying the value that we're adding. Okay, so that is the overall meta theme of this conversation. Okay, now it's not to force every project to say, to compare me, apples here, oranges there, and then you get, the same data integrity problems within our teams, right? Like when people start fudging their data to show like my returns are bigger. So no, but I think this is more of a smell test, right? That as a state lead, as kind of a vertical lead, when you think about what is a good use of your time, what is a good use of, are we getting leverage, right? And that's all. It's just forcing a little bit of that before we start. Okay, so it's almost just a framework as opposed to, it's not meant to be a gridlock as opposed to forcing you to think that way. Right? Sure.
Yeah, Karthik, just one point on that, but this is not necessarily for the larger team, but at least as the leadership of the management, we should ask ourselves the question, when has a project failed? Because the impression that I'm getting right now is that everything is a success, just in differing degrees, which frankly is not true. And I think we should have that discipline and that self-critical sort of attitude to say, "Ki boss, nahi ho raha hai, this is failed," rather than worrying about how will people feel and kitna bura lagega. That has to be.
Absolutely, and I think, but that's why I keep going back to the delivery and the learning kind of discipline, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes you might say that I've done a bunch of work and the project has failed because it's not moving forward, okay? And then as an org, we come back and saying it's not a fail as much as a pause, okay?
Yeah.
And you say I take the learnings and I wait for the opportunity. So yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Right? And some things will be true failures. So you say like, what will be
I actually think this system is really helpful for that, right? So as I keep big, but like at ID Insight, you would do this once at the beginning of the project, and then you would do it again, right? And so like actually having that like kind of guess of what you thought your ROI might be, and being able to compare that to what your ROI actually was, or just kind of what you thought the impact might be and what it, you evaluate. So I think having that discipline of doing it once at inception can really help leadership identify failures.
Correct. So how we are, So how we are doing it in the workstation? Sorry, people like who are bored of hearing this. But basically, at the proposal level, when a project pitches a proposal, they have to estimate the ROI. May not be in numbers, but some sort of number or qualitative indicators, right? Then they are pushed to do, once the project gets approved by the leadership, then it goes to the initiation phase where they are forced to do a log frame. I mean, what is your understanding as to how the project will run, right? That kind of thinking we are not putting in right now, right, at the start of a project. So I agree with Stephen that that needs to be done at the start of the project. And then what we are instituting is that on a monthly or a quarterly basis, depending on the total duration of the project reports if the success indicators or outputs and outcomes are being visible. Can you see something, right? If not, then it gets flagged to leadership that, okay, it's been 2 quarters and they can't see anything. That means it's a red flag. They need discussion, or there needs to be a deliberation or step back, Vijay, as you were suggesting this morning. So I think that those are the kind of processes we are instituting. We just want people to take this exercise seriously. Sorry again, pitching for it, but I think it will be super useful, right? That there is a constant tracking of what we had thought of and where we are going, so that this recalibration, again taking Vijay's words, can happen, can be made, and then at the end of the project we can measure it.
Yeah, and I think again, so it's amazing how similar these issues are, like to how you think about research, right? Because there you're kind of making the same decision considerations with regard to how much time you're investing, right? So again, see, the right time for this is not necessarily on day one of a project,
No,
right?
not
Because,
really.
so just like sometimes you'll say, okay, idea mein kuch promise hai, I will spend a pilot, right? I'll do like, a month, say whatever. So, and again, this is something that state leads and vertical leads need to come up with rough kind of, benchmarks. It says, okay, if something passes your smell test that this is worth doing, spend a month, okay, scoping it out without that. But the moment it starts kind of becoming a formal project, then we're going to put the discipline, and even ROI might be too much, right? You just say, okay, what is the expected impact?
Exactly.
See, what are just the discipline
Yes.
Yeah.
of what change am I expecting to see on the returns and on the cost? Okay,
Yeah.
what is going to be the team allocation? What is my expectation? And roughly, what is the opportunity cost, right? And that's as we start hitting our constraints, and that's also two ways to think about it, right? One is I'm capacity constrained in terms of funding and people, and so I need to say no to things based on opportunity cost.
Correct.
The other might be to say, listen, the first 4 things I'm doing are great. The next 4 things I'm not doing also have public ROI of 20x. So I need to take this to leadership and say, hey guys, raise the money around this so that we can actually do these things. So
Yeah.
that's
And it will keep evolving, right? On day one, you won't know even what to expect in terms of outcomes. I just know maybe one work stream I have identified, and over a period of time, it keeps, getting revised. So yeah, just a
so
habit
it's
of.
just a disciplining device.
Exactly,
It's not
just
going to be a
discipline.
straight jacket,
Correct,
right?
correct.
It is just
Yeah.
forcing a little bit of discipline, because otherwise, it's just so easy to.
Correct.
This is essentially then it's a management tool, Karthik, and management is an art, of course. It's not going to throw up an objective, and this is exactly why we started this entire process. It cannot possibly throw up an objective measure. Agar if it is throwing up an objective measure, then the only question students like me ever ask, pass mark kitna hai bhai? तो वो बता दो, मतलब if you're measuring, what is the pass mark?
But
When
we
is
need
it a
to-
success?
But we need to also identify which indicators are measurable and then measure
Correct.
them appropriately, right? Like it's not like pura qualitative.
OM.
Like,
So how we plan to take this forward is in 2 ways. So today at the end of this group session, we'll hopefully have some inputs into this overall framework. But more importantly, over the coming weeks, it'll be helpful, and the workstation is also going to be set up to incorporate this. It'll be helpful if you could put even a few of your projects past this. And provide feedback on which of these indicators are relevant, which of these indicators you think are relevant but very hard to capture, etc., so that we can fine tune this.
Yeah, so basically, building on this, right? So now that we've sort of discussed what could be the sort of system that helps you define metrics and all, typically what other organizations have done, especially in development sector, is sort of evolved this MAEs.
So we can see the slide.
We're sort of
That's my
using examples from other organizations just to see what we shouldn't do, basically. What are some of the risks? So traditionally, wherever we see M&E as it gets evolved in organizations, these are sort of the things that we observe, especially in larger organizations. Like, even though people agree there is pressure to do evaluations, M&E gets evolved in a very traditional sort of way, where as Stephen was saying, implementation teams or implementing organizations, like yesterday we saw Save the Children, Care, they are all having a lot of pressure to show impact, but it doesn't always become a priority because there are so many other priorities. There's donor pressure, there's pressure on implementation, government is already pressurizing us to do a lot of things. So this sort of becomes a tick box exercise, essentially. The other sort of thing we've noticed again and again is that there is excessive focus on measuring impact, and not the fault of JPAL, but excessive focus on RCTs, but that's often leading to other key things getting neglected. So what about monitoring? What about process evaluation? How do you even know that something is working? Everybody is jumping the gun and saying that the world is telling us do RCTs, this is the best way to do impact, let's do that. So if this is done wrong, so if we end up doing this in the wrong way, what are the risks? One is, we think that none of this will end up helping us. None of this will help us in planning or inform our decisions. It's just going to end up being a document sitting somewhere. Maybe something gets filled on the workstation. Like, it can be anything, right? Like, it just ends up sitting somewhere which nobody uses. every year whenever Vijay will come and ask like where is this, people are going to fill it, but it doesn't get used.
I have different ways of doing it. I was just telling Shatakshi my experiment with the Eagles platform. If you're lying without use,
Mhm.
slowly we can get it.
Correct, correct.
But Vijay,
we decided we have to do it.
But that's the problem, right? We may end up falling in the government trap of treating compliance as accomplishment, and we don't want to be in that position.
No, but it has. That's where this session is important. We decide whether we want it.
Of course, yes.
If we want it and we are convinced about its merits, it
Check.
has to be done.
Check.
Correct. So that's what we're sort of bringing out the risks and taking examples from like the big organizations that have done this and what is ending up happening there. Compliance, everybody starts thinking of it as a tick box compliance thing and like nobody does it. The other is it's also leading to poor and misleading results. The thing which Steven was talking about, right? Like that teams themselves may start saying things that don't make sense. The leadership is probably not going to believe what the teams are saying. They may start using misleading methods. There are so many people we have seen that they'll do pre-post comparison and say that we have achieved so much impact, which is technically wrong. So we don't want to get into that trap as well. That people start doing impact measurement just for the sake of it, using the wrong methods. And this last part is, if we do it the wrong way, this is just going to affect our credibility. That if we start saying things that there is so much impact, we have 10x impact on this, 20x impact on that, anybody who's going to dig like little deeper is going to find out that what you're saying is false, and that's going to affect our credibility. So just wanted to start with highlighting all the risks, that we don't want to repeat these mistakes and evolve it in the right way. So what's the kind of accepted knowledge, accepted benchmark, let's say, that which are the organizations where this has worked? What have they done right? I won't get into the details, but this is all captured under this simple term, evaluative thinking. And it's nothing but what Parul was saying, that everybody sort of inculcates it in their day-to-day activities. And it's simple things. It may sound simple on this on the slide, but actually it'll need a lot of the thinking that Praveen was talking about, right? That what is the sort of impact you had on the people, on the staff? What did you change? All of that will come into the picture, but everywhere we've seen that this works is when evaluation is not considered activity. It's not a tick box. It's part of your culture. What Karthik keeps saying, learning organization, we are a knowledge organization. Like, how do you make that happen? We're gonna get into that, I guess, but these are just baby steps, trying to put down on paper like what we should do. So,
Sorry, Ganesh, so all of these points are about evaluating certain interventions or projects. I would urge you to not get sort of blinkered with this, because we are also fundamentally thinking about org level success. We're not talking about project level success here. This is a way to think of it, but the idea is to look at org level success. Vijay, another feather in Javed's cap is that there's an order now that TRIF fellows will be working with us in the districts. Now, how does one build that into a project success metric, right? We know, you and I know that Javed is spectacular, but how does one, put that on an Excel sheet?
We should
That is a success
Parul
indicator.
will have
I'll do
answer to
it.
that.
Yeah. No, I have the answer. Like
Achhi.
the work. No.
I have also done this RCT course. That's why I'm understanding a lot of.
No, Vijay, that's why on our side now.
You should do it. And then we'll see what.
No, I'm very much on Pritchard's side of the road.
But you do this and then we'll.
I think JPAL course helps.
Treatment effect.
Yes.
This is a success. But थोड़ा selection bias था. इसने किया इसने नहीं किया.
Quasi experimental करते, quasi experimental.
Ganesh, I have a question. Say for example, when we are looking at the evaluative thinking, considering ours is like a startup, again, this is something for the leadership till when we are going to call ourselves a startup, because till then we can say that okay, we tried something, if it fails we will call it as version 1.0 and say we have X learnings. But I'm sure that they are going to be there in the previous research also, right? Because we are not inventing anything new, or probably the learnings could be very little compared to the research that is out there. So, would like to understand when you are looking at this evaluative thinking, did any organization had this saying that okay, say after 4 years or 5 years, we are putting down a hard stop on this whatever learning approach, and from now onwards, for every project that we are going to take it up, these are some benchmarks that we are keeping. Again, I understood on the extreme end what you are talking about, but fundamentally I'm going back to what Karthik had raised. After say 3 years or 4 years, the donor may say that yeah, you guys are talking great, but to the government, what is that single deliverable that you have delivered, where government is saying yes, CEGIS delivered something that is of great value, where they will say, not us. So is there something, again, if it is not, just a point to think.
Yeah. One sort of reaction to that is, I don't think any successful organizations are stopping this. They are, I don't think any time saying that from here onwards we are not a learning organization, from here onwards we are a implementation organization. I think my quick reaction is we should never say that we'll stop learning from at this point onwards. It will always be maybe going up and down.
I think Santosh's point was that. I think Santosh's point was for how long can we give ourselves the slack of saying we're a startup before you have delivered real outcomes. I think that is
Exactly, because see, learnings are going to happen, right? Say for example, if I talk about the for-profit, the top MBBs, right? They what are they good for? One is leaving about the great presentations, their knowledge management systems, right? So how they are going to bring in? Of course, this is something that I learned from Praveen in thinking about it. So. No, it's a good thing. No, because whenever I'm thinking on the projects currently, that's how I've started thinking. Otherwise, it's very easy to carry it away with the government asks, right? So, but yeah, Karthik, that is what my point is.
Here,
It is It's on.
okay. So here I think it will depend. Once we start doing this, whatever agreed framework, it will depend on project to project. Like for example, ECD probably will be able to say very soon how much time it may take. But some other new work we may not be, and we really don't know. I told before in my session when I asked this question, the answers are 5 years to never kind of thing. So we will figure out. We will figure out on the way. Today it's very difficult. Once we start doing it, we agree on common framework. Start doing it. We are not an organization which ever will say this is now like final, now you cannot change it. We are always, like for example, Karthik's theory of change, somebody asked, is it everything? And I had answered that, like probably 80% we have figured out. I don't know, this is a random number. But at least 80% has been figured out. Why not work on that? And then we'll see whether it was 80% or not. So that is the approach. We have to be open at this point. We cannot put a number at this point.
But I think, yeah, sorry, I think if I may just come from Santosh. No, I think there is, yeah, so obviously, the pandemic has set back certain things, and as an org, there is some slack, right, it builds as a result. But I'm with Santosh, okay, in the sense that in the next 2 years, right, at least in the states where we have already been present for 1 or 2 years, it is time to start showing deep results, right? Like, I mean, not just, okay, we've done some, yahan pe kuch kiya, wahan pe kuch kiya. But, for example, where the tide may be turning, right? I mean, it's after 2 years of breaking our heads on education. Suddenly, we have a commissioner who yesterday who issued a letter saying, like, I want CEGIS to do admin data integrity. See, if you manage to do admin data integrity and learning outcomes across the state, to me, like, I mean, that is already such a big thing, because we have not managed to do that, like, in 25 years, and we wasted 15 years as a country in terms of learning outcomes by arguing between NAS versus ASAR, okay? So, the good news is that the people, and that's why, see, who are the people who are kind of co-funders in this, right? They are the people who are, these are not the small donors. These are the biggest players in the game, right? Whether it's BMGF, whether it's going back, who understand that this is where the highest returns are, and it's also the hardest problem we face, okay? And therefore, the lessons learned in India are also relevant globally. So, they understand, for example, that fixing admin data is such a foundational thing that they'll be more than happy, right? I mean, to say that, okay, this is already a step function impact you have had. But we need these intermediate markers that we say as an organization, we're going to put all our weight on a few big things and make it happen. Okay, so to me, admin data integrity is fundamental. If you do this, the truth scores, you do this in 1 or 2 sectors, in 1 or 2 states, I think that's huge, okay? I think from a CLOP team perspective, if you go in and take your frameworks and say one department, one state, one department, okay, then we have delivered kind of an end-to-end capacity building solution, okay? okay, that says this is now a professionalized human resource force, okay, that is going to think about competence and have a framework. So while you've done that, and that might take 3 years, okay, that's not a 1 year project, but one state, one sector, completing. That I think we should be able to do. Okay? ICDS, we have the evidence on the 2 worker model, right? So getting that done in even one state, okay, and saying, do this at a level of 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 centers. Create this as partly of a pathway to scale, along with all of the governance things. These are things I think are realistic goals, and I will personally now. I mean, pandemic was this huge disruption, right? But once we identify some of these top org priorities, like I will be spending time at the finance minister levels in states to kind of saying, okay, this is why we need to get it done. And then once the political willingness is there, then the role of CEGIS is to say, how do we really sprint, right? So that is where, this 2 or 3 years, when I say the prep work and the prep time is spent fine, and this is we are preparing for takeoff. It is because now we have, hopefully as an org, learned enough to codified things that when those opportunities come, we're able to get it done. So I agree. So I think we can't go too long and think, chalo, we're still learning. You need some big wins, okay? And that's why revenue is an important one, because there the results are tangible and quick. Now, of course, with the caveat that, revenue is coming from taxpayers' pocket, and so it can actually be worsening outcomes if it's not kind of, like I said, the chapter is about quantity and quality of revenue. Yeah. Okay, but yes, with those caveats, I think in the next 2 years, we really need to start kind of hitting some serious outcome metrics.
So, but on that note, Karthik, are we not being too modest, frankly, in our ambitions, especially with you returning? I'm very happy that the powers above will always remain benevolent, but the fact of the matter is we perhaps not pushing ourselves enough.
Yeah, we will.
So, Praveen, I think we'd have to add another column saying KM.
Knowledge management, Shima.
I meant you, Karthik.
Sorry, just
CSF journey, some reflection.
one very small intervention, right, on how you define the success of, like, say, a project, right? Because as an organization, you're trying to grow in multiple dimensions at the same time. And sometimes what happens is that you, when deciding when to take a project or not, you have to take that into account, right? It can't be only from a perspective that whether it will show impact on, for example, a theory of change. And let me give an example, right? And I think this also goes back to our experience looking at CSF and some other organizations. Yesterday, Professor Karthik and us were discussing about administrative data in education in Uttar Pradesh, right? Now, suppose, if CEGIS wants to take up that project or not, I think having that discipline to write that what are the top 3 objectives of us while we are taking this project, right? One could be as simple as we want to show a proof of concept of how administrative data integrity can work in, like, say, a district level, right? And that by itself, forget its impact on learning outcomes, because that requires multiple other things. That by itself is one big objective which, like, say, organizations in education sector would greatly appreciate. Second, we want to have a toehold in Uttar Pradesh and ensure that through that we build at least visibility in Uttar Pradesh bureaucracy. From an organization perspective, that's also an objective of the project. And third could be that we want to develop a working relationship with CSF, so that, like, this is something that we can take to other states also. So I think just having a discipline without over-engineering to write top 3 objectives of each project, right? And having the discipline to revisit that often is a great step forward without getting into too bogged down into like quantifying everything, right? And this is something like even, for example, CSF didn't do. But one of the things it did was it had a something of process of an investment committee where like senior leaders will get together and decide whether to fund something or not. And just by the virtue of senior teams coming together periodically and discussing whether to take something or not, I think you develop a common understanding of what organization decides to go ahead or not. And it's never unique, it's never one dimension.
No, so but I have a fundamental disagreement there, and this is something that we face on the ground all the time, right? When you're in the government, whether if your decision is to be whether or not I should take something up, that decision has to be made at the level of the state, or at best at the level of the department. Once you've entered, to say I will put my foot down and not do this that the secretary wants, it is just not practically feasible. Let's be clear. I think the fact of the matter is that there will be ego issues involved, there will be other priorities involved. You may lose traction because you didn't do something that they wanted you to do. So the decision of whether or not to enter anything cannot possibly be at the project level. It will have to be at the state level, at best at the department level. Now if we go into Uttar Pradesh and we say, okay boss, we will only do ADI, we will only do it with education, but in the process we will try and build visibility. The moment you build visibility. There will be 10 other requests. Now, are you going to deny them, especially if they come from the topmost authority? So the decision has to be a step removed. It cannot be at the project level to say, I will do this project but not do that. It's not your choice.
Yeah, no, so I don't think there's disagreement there. I think the question here is, I mean, leaving that example aside, I think Praveen's point is much simpler than that, right? I mean, which is for any given project, right? You just need to say what are the goals, why we do this. That's all.
Fair enough, which is fair. Yeah.
I have a point.
Maybe within our portfolio, if you see Telangana and Delhi,
Yep.
our position may not be very strong.
Mm-hmm.
But in Tamil Nadu, for example, in BTC, we have been able to do that till now. And it will be the more credibility you build, then people will start listening to us. So maybe sir can comment on that. If you see the other side, they value you. It's not that you're going after them. They are coming after you. Then they have to respect what you're saying. And okay, there has to be a fine balance and all that, but it's possible. I'm just mentioning the possibility of doing that. It's possible.
And frankly, a lot of this is face time and trust. And once I'm back, right? I mean, it does change that. And I think one of the other things which we are actively working on is we are going to build now a network of distinguished advisors, like, who have lifelong experience in the government and kind of deeply understand these systems as a way of kind of guiding our teams. Okay, so to build structures whereby our teams kind of have senior people to kind of present to at least once a month. Okay, sometimes even more often, and sometimes take the guidance. Are we doing this right? Are we doing that wrong? They will have their own relations. They'll have their own things. So we will kind of see. Right now things are still over dependent on me. Right, and so we really have to diversify kind of our pool of just more technical expertise, credibility, understanding of government, and so that's very much happened.
I mean,
The diversification has happened a bit in Tamil Nadu and BTC.
No, but Vijay, even there, the point was that this was made explicit and this was agreed upon with the government in the first instance. It has to be made explicit at the time of agreement, rather than subsequently saying ki boss ye ho jayega. I mean, see, the thing is...
Sorry, let's not get...
Sorry, yeah.
Can I...
Yes, please, sir.
Give an alternative. It's not about whether you have to do it or not do it, but there's a middle path where you use this as an opportunity for bringing change process.
Okay.
For example, in ETI, DMU, we are also asked the same thing by the line ministries. We are a very small group of people trying to do a lot of other things, so there's no bench strength.
Yeah.
So what we will do is figure out a third path, saying that look, DMU has a lot of lateral entrance, and by using professional fees, there are two heads, broadly in the ministry: salary head and professional fees. If you have some professional fees, why don't you hire lateral entrants?
Yeah.
We can give you terms of reference. We have systematic hiring process. Niti does it. Why don't you follow it? So that's one way. Basically, they are asking a lot of things because they don't have internal capacity to do it. So one way is to immediately support them, but I think it's a great opportunity for bringing that change process. So most of the governments are very weak and are very dependent largely because they don't have internal talent.
Right.
So how can they bring? The second idea that we always keep repeating is, why don't you have long-term partnerships with various academic institutions and think tanks in your own state? And you have so much of resources. All that you have to do is to give them 0.01%. The point is, this type of even policy dollars doesn't even exist. So use this opportunity. Obviously, they are coming to you because you have some credibility. Maybe to some extent, there are occasions where maybe expressed our helplessness also. We said that we ourselves don't have, that type of open transparency. But in that whole process, use this as an opportunity for bringing about change process.
Cool. So we're going to keep moving. Now we have more pressure because Dr. Gune is here. We're going to talk about monitoring and evaluation. Please be gentle on us. This is not even a crash course. I think we just want to define a few terms so that everybody is on the same page.
He was already feeling pressured with Vijay and Karthik being in the room, and now with you, sir, I think it's augmented.
Cool. So basically, going back, right? So all of these discussions are again being centered on sort of the success metric. But what is going to be the generation process? Like, how are we going to start getting data on these things? How are we going to start collating these things? So as we were discussing earlier, like, this is all going to come down to putting together a system in the organization itself. Most organizations are calling M&E. It's now evolved to MENL. Some have gone to MERL, which is like research also. But for purposes of today's session, we're going to call it MENL because learning part of it is the most important. So very simply put, I think what we're expecting the projects to do is having some kind of data generation systems. It could be qualitative or quantitative, that are going to generate feedback for you to improve your interventions. It could be simply things that are going to tell you about challenges, be it on field, be it at various levels in the hierarchy. What is going to be your strategy to get that feedback? What is going to be the strategy for course corrections? This refers to some of the things that Vijay was talking about, step backs, reconsidering some of your priorities, but just codifying that in one place so that projects have that in a cycle. And then understanding all your indirect effects, especially what Praveen was talking about earlier, right? That you'll not only have effects on your immediate project, but on the ecosystem, on the economy, on other people in the government. So how will you even capture that? It's well and good to say that, you know, we are having that impact, but what is going to be your channel of feedback that tells you that, okay, I'm working in women and child development, but health also has started seeing some impact because of what you're doing. Are you going to build a relationship there? Are you going to have a different sort of feedback channel? That kind of thinking is what we're encouraging projects to do under this. And then all we're saying, I mean, I'm gonna go faster because we're running out of time, but basically this is all going to help you measure the success of the projects. It's not something magical that at the end of 2 years we're going to start measuring things and now we'll say that, you know, there is ROI of so many X, so many 100%. It's an ongoing process. So this is all to just give you a structure of what this can look like. So because some people have asked this, this is all going to start with monitoring. Let's not jump the gun, start talking about evaluations. It's going to start with basic monitoring. What is even happening today? What is happening on the ground? These are some keywords you can look at. It's a continuous thing. It's not something that's going to like happen once at the end of a year. That's never going to work. It's about constantly collecting whatever information you're taking and looking at it a bit deeply. The step backs which Vijay was talking about really helps do that. I think some projects have started doing this already, where they take a look at all the data that's come in the last few months and see what are we even learning from that. This is going, as I keep repeating, it's going to be quantitative as well as qualitative. Let's not get bogged down by everything has to be like a survey or a MIS or something that's going to keep giving you numbers on a daily basis. A lot of this could be feedback. I mean, there are a lot of people here working on Panchayati Raj project, right? So much of what we have learned is actually doing those focus group discussions and interviews with people and not really doing surveys of people. So that's sort of the importance, and I think last point here is this will still not give you causality. This will still not be telling you whether your project is causing the impact that you're seeing on ground or causing the losses you're seeing on the ground, but at least it will tell you that what you're doing is in the right direction or not. And I think we're going to get into some of the depth of what this will look like by taking ECD as an example. But evaluation will follow soon. Once we start, as projects mature, as projects get some of this information with them, they're going to prepare for evaluations. And I think that's what some of the mature projects like PRRD, ECD in Telangana, they are gearing up for this. They're gearing up to do this more rigorously. Evaluations will be actual assessments. You have to kind of define what your outcomes will be, kind of define what you're measuring, and then design something, a system in which you'll collect data for that and start measuring it. This is where RCTs will come in, but there are many other methods. I think we're already, there are enough people in this room who will talk about methods, but one big caution we wanted to give was start with monitoring and then go to I think we have a slide couple of slides ahead, but this is what we want everybody to sort of remember, right? That it's an evolving process. You are starting with diagnostics, you're going to go to logical frameworks, just defining your indicators. Then you will go for process evaluations. You'll just try to understand, are things working or not? I think a lot of projects currently are in this phase. They're just trying to understand if you're doing things the right way. Only then we'll go to impact evaluation. And probably not every project will go for impact evaluation.
Yeah.
Only few of them will. Maybe, let's say if you're doing 10 things in a state, 3 already get determined as failures. That's very important to learn. Sorry, actually we're changing this a little bit because we have a
We
lot.
received an extension from Priyanka.
Half an hour.
We'll still break at 3:45. That's going to be there, but the activity will probably get pushed.
So one thing I wanted to mention here, I think we should not resist evaluation. Evaluation or RCTs are considered as something, like which is purely academic and why do we need to do it? It's going to, people will hate me for saying this, but I think wherever possible we should do it because it may be intuitive that obviously if you do supportive supervision, it will improve efficiency. But there are still certain things that we don't know, right? We don't know how to communicate to different levels. We don't know what kind of communication channels will work. Now we'll have an evaluation 101.
No. I think this is very important to clarify, right? I mean, if you look at, in any enterprise, okay, there is a cost of acquiring information, right? And all research, in some ways, is a cost of acquiring information, right? Now, the question of how much do you invest in the precision of the information depends on how big a stake is the decision you're going to take, okay? So, the reason why, even if you look at my RCPs, I only do RCPs on things that we spend over 10,000 crores, okay? Because when you're spending that kind of money, then you want the much higher evidentiary standard, okay? But for most of what we do, you're not going to need anything close to that, okay? So, and that's precisely why do we have, why are the things that we want to do here not things that were doable with JPAL? Because JPAL is fundamentally a research organization and they will disseminate ideas based on kind of what's been found. And yes, they definitely care about the downstream adoption, okay? But we are in this completely different business of the iterative improvement of state capacity, right? So this is a long ongoing process and you will keep on making micro tinkering, improving, and so often precisely this kind of process monitoring, right? But starting by saying what is the problem, right? And if the problem is something as simple as the data is garbage, okay, that everybody's making up the data, that's a pretty big problem, okay? And then if you say the idea of this intervention of supportive supervision is that suddenly you're held accountable for telling the truth and that there is a way of testing this, that, and then going down a few downs. Now, once you've stabilized the whole idea, it is possible to do an RCT because you're not going to be able to scale this up over this whole state anyway. So one way to think about this is you will do and deploy and pilot and prototype in a district or two till you say, okay, this is my model, okay? That is then a good time to think about a high quality evaluation because when you want to take it to a different state, to a different sector, having that to say, okay, I validate. So simple, high frequency monitoring, right? So we did that one study so today, in fact, Dr. Bono was asking, right, this morning, I said, where is my number of 10x coming from, right? It is coming from a collection of different studies where we have actually quantified this. And then you see what a big difference that makes at a senior policy level, right? So if we didn't have that, and this is the point, that when you think about how do you get acceptability beyond a certain kind of local listing, that's where the higher quality of the evidence really matters. So I'm very, very conscious of the cost of generating evidence, and which is why we will only do a few RCTs over 5 years, right? This is not like suddenly we are going to do like 1,000 RCTs. But on the other hand, where does it make sense to do a lot of RCTs is when the marginal cost of the RCT is really low, like in the tax work, right? So in the tax work, And effectively you were generating results in 2 months, okay? So, and that was not very expensive. So, you were going to do this nudge intervention to improve tax compliance, okay? So, in that case, there is no reason not to do the RCT, right? Because the outcome, see, 90% of the cost of an RCT is the outcome data, okay? So, when the outcome data is generated, the surveys that you need to do to collect the independent data. So, when the data is being generated automatically from the system, and when it is 100% reliable because it is revenue, like I mean, paisa actually khazane mein bhar raha hai, so then the marginal cost of the RCT is epsilon. It's just the time of the people thinking about it.
And also, there are very few moving parts in such things.
Exactly. So that is the art and science and the judgment of saying when does an RCT make sense. In fact, see, if you look at my education RCTs, for example, I've never done RCT till I did 3 years of fieldwork and understanding ho kya hai, right? So our NREGA RCTs were done with Paul and Sandeep, who had worked in NREGA for many, many years. So it's only after deep institutional knowledge that it made sense. So I've never pushed, for example, anybody for but I'm just, so it's not just this, but I'm also kind of, it's important to understand that KM is not just like RCT, right? but it is, but the value of that tax RCT is huge for everybody, right? It's high for the government, it's high for the org, and it gives us the confidence to say, okay, isko jaake scale karo, right? Same with ADI. So there's no reason why, after we have prototyped the concept, that we cannot do the RCT. So, but that will only be a few projects at some point. So, anyway.
No,
Siddharth and Bhalu, yeah.
Sorry, before you do that, a much simpler, so to avoid the need for this discussion, much simpler way to do this is, all your projects, the success will be measured by OM team, and the budget or what resources you get will be decided by the PF team.
That's one point.
So that's actually
in the morning I mentioned practice what we preach. I'm actually thinking we will discuss each of these teams, external facing team, PM, OM, everybody will have an internal org के लिए एक छोटा सा unit बनाना पड़ेगा. And they will monitor internally क्या हो रहा है.
So मेरे को funding में जाना पड़ेगा.
So first, Harim is already telling me what's happening in the next 15 minutes. So I can already, she's already predicting what's happening in the 15 minutes ahead. So she's been telling me this thing. But I think on a lighter note, like if for a person who's not this whole M&E field, when Karthik talks to you and because he's the founder, you still have to agree, not in agreement. So he's looking at me and he's saying you have to do RCT. My counter question to you is, if you are working at the state capacity and you have a success, you got augmentation of GST revenues by a certain percentage, right? There is enough trust in the IS civil servants machinery, all respect to Vijay and Dr. Gonu, is they will talk to each other. One secretary will talk to each other and say कि success हो गया है, आप कर लो, and there's a competitive feel to it. So what's the need of an RCT to do it rather than documenting the process of how we got this? That's my question. So the evaluation is not necessary always. The power of communication and competition also matters, right?
Okay, so but these are complements, not substitutes, right? So see, here's a way of thinking about it, right? I mean, and here I will push back a little bit, right? Because the IAS push network, okay, is that, yes, it's useful for smell test, okay, it's definitely useful. But this is exactly, sorry, kya hua?
No, we have to keep planning.
Oh, planning and
Planning
tax.
the
Yeah, to prevent the KM hijack, sorry. So let's talk about the over dinner. Yeah, exactly. The pun is too ironic, right? The knowledge management in KM. Sorry, Bhalu, you want to say something?
Yeah, so to make a quick point, like building on what you were saying, that essentially like there is something called publication bias even in academia where we concentrate too much on positive results and not on null results. So I think in this whole ROI framework, we should also be careful that when we are talking about effective governance, we might want to evaluate policies which are popular but may not be effective. So even in this RCT, like a nudge experiment, I would be happy if there's a zero result also.
Correct.
Because it's a popular scheme, but nobody has thought that whether it's working or not.
Yeah.
No, exactly, and I think I said this again that talk with Michael. See, I learn as much or more from my zeros than the ones that are positive, right? Because, and that's important. And anyway, it's a long conversation. My bottom line is this, listen, just because the founder of CEGIS is a card carrying RCT wala, like, that doesn't mean like, I mean the whole lot. See, मैंने कभी personal team को बोला आपने तो नहीं because I जानता हूँ. So, Siddharth, चैन की सांस. So,
Authority of idea over idea of authority.
अरे मेरे ही फंडे में No, but see, even all of you guys, right, yesterday, I never pushed, right? I said, like, let's take this step back. But on the other hand, if you're doing a tax compliance thing with large administrative data where the marginal cost is basically zero, then there's no do it. So there's always this kind of cost benefit calculation of does it make sense? So that's
So we'll keep moving.
Revolver handle.
Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe I'll just sit there, increase the marginal cost of getting the mic. That's another experiment.
Yeah, so we'll keep moving. I think just to not counter but caveat Devashi's argument that OM team will do this. This is something like a lot of NGOs have also done. Create one M&A team inside and unko bol diya. Keep doing, keep collecting data, keep doing surveys. That again never works because then those people become isolated. They'll also start working in silos. We see this in the government. Planning department sits in some dilapidated building usually. So that itself shows that like you separate this function away, take it away from people who are implementing. That itself is sort of a dead zone.
But quality control and all can still happen, right? Like
Once
cleaning
it is
quality
agreed,
control.
as I'm saying, we can move ahead.
Yeah, sure.
How to do? Once it is agreed, we have to do.
Yeah.
You tell me what has to be done. We'll figure out.
Yes.
We have time for that.
Yeah.
Today we can concentrate on this.
Actually, a counter argument to that is that OM team doesn't work in silos. Okay, they have like OM member in like every state and every other team, whether it's legal. So in that sense, OM has representation which is like cross.
I don't know if you're mentioning this in a good sense or a bad sense. The way you started.
Let's move.
Cool, cool.
Let's move on.
Yes,
Let's
yes.
move on.
So
We'll figure out.
we did M, we did E. Evaluations are coming. They're coming very rigorously for just few projects. The other projects are going to continue doing monitoring. They just will continue tracking things that are happening. And learning is just an ongoing process. Again, in many organizations, this is becoming a separate thing. This is becoming like at the end of some year, like M&E team will come up with a report saying like these are the things you have done, this is what it looks like, and we don't want that. And I think Workstation has a lot of these features which hopefully will push project teams to like keep evaluating, keep seeing what is working. There's this last thing which, I mean, it's just food for thought, but the people have sort of codified this also, how organizations evolve, right? So they start with single loop learning where they're just asking how can we do this better. They're doing something but they start with how are we doing this better. That itself is a positive step. And they keep evolving to, in the end, start questioning themselves. Why are we even here? Why are we doing this? So, yeah, reach that stage. So, for people who are interested can like look into this further, that how orgs are evolving across these three levels. We will move on to.
Why are we here and after that exit?
Proceeding to moksha.
Yeah, so let's get into this. We'll start using ECD as an example. Big focus of what we'll do today is log frame, because we are still at the stage of defining what different projects are doing and what will be your indicators, what will you track. We'll hopefully do another session later talking about how do you collect data for it as well. So Parul, do you want to take over?
So here, I mean, we may not have done the best job, and definitely there are limitations to what we did for ECD, but we have recently become very conscious about, you know, like what is it that we are trying to do, how do we measure what we are going to do, etc. So we'll just present what we did. Maybe all the projects can start following this process, and then we can, you know, iterate and also improve on our process, right? So the objective of the group work is also to improve the way we are thinking about things. So this is just not high level thinking, there's a lot of thinking that has gone into it, but there may be gaps, like just a disclaimer. So what we did here was, I mean, these are the steps we should ideally follow, right? So clearly define the project goals, like after, and that happens usually after your diagnostic stage. So I'm taking over after diagnostic. You are able to identify what your project goals are and what are the work streams that align with CEGIS. Here I'm again like discounting all the other things that you can do, say programmatic interventions or things that do not align with CEGIS theory of change but do matter for the outcomes to realize, right? So the point that Vijay was also making in his session. Once you have done that, then you anticipate what are the final outcomes based on those goals, right? So you have your goals, you have your work streams, and based on your work streams, you know what your final goals are going to be. And then try to map out the pathway between your work stream and your final outcome, right? Like what are the specific inputs that are required in those work streams, what will be the outputs, what are the intermediate outcomes, and then what are the longer term outcomes and impact if we ever get to measure it. And then once your log frame is done, once you have identified your pathway, then at each stage you identify what your success matrix or your indicators are along with your data sources. Now some of those data sources may already exist within the system, say your administrative data, or some of them you may have to institute, like monitoring processes or evaluation processes. So that we'll get to there. And then all through we want this entire process to be embedded within the project life, right? So at each stage, project should learn and improvise as we go, so that scaling the solution and replicating the solution both at the sectoral level and at the state level is possible. Okay? So this one Ganesh already covered. Now here, in case of ECD, after our diagnostic, we identified our goal, which was to strengthen the design in the limits of the capacity of the state, because design is being done by the central government, of ICDS services towards improving the early childhood development outcomes, including nutrition and cognitive ability, and in a cost-effective and sustainable manner. Now this goal itself has gone through multiple iterations. We started by saying that we want to improve nutrition outcomes within first 1,000 days of a child's development, right? Then we realized no, health department doesn't intervene too much, and our partnership is with WDCW. We need to remove that 1,000-day bracket, even if most effect happens at that time. We also then realized during our diagnostic that design is, like, you can't do much about the design. CAS already exists, Portion Tracker already exists. There's a lot of protocols from the central government that already exist, so you can't limit that. So we have also identified our limitations as to what we can do, and then we added terms like cost effectiveness and sustainability, because in the org conversations we were having in the leadership team, we realized that these two are very important for us to sustain and proceed as a project or overall intervention or as ECD mission. Then we identified our work streams. Now here the gap is that our diagnostic itself was not very wholesome, right? So our PM diagnostic was very limited to our understanding. Our PF diagnostic was kind of nil at that point. So the interventions we could identify were just aligning to the problems and the solutions we already were aware of, right? So we came up with data-driven governance. We realized that convergence was important. We realized that augmenting frontline workers' capacity is important. And then, but we also know that there is a huge programmatic element, because it's a complex problem to solve. Only governance will not lead to outcomes, and if you want to measure citizen level outcomes, you need to be aware of your ecosystem. Again, taking cue from the conversation we were having with Vijay this morning. So in order to facilitate that collaboration, you need to be aware of your ecosystem, and you again need to be aware of your limitations. And as CEGIS, we are also trying to based on that understanding, facilitate some of these. In some states it will be easier, in some others it will be a problem, but with our existing partners, say CSF, it's easier to, just pitch some interventions around childhood education. Then after we identified that goal and work streams, we figured out what are the system level, functionality level, and citizen level outcomes of the project. These are very, so this is being broken down the way Praveen was showing that table for the ROI. But here we are focusing only on system, functionality, and citizen, because that is where your interventions are directly communicating with the beneficiaries or the system overall. And we also try to map how this will effectively work, right? So based on your work streams or based on your interventions, it will impact systems and functionalities first. And systems and functionalities will keep impacting each other in terms of the outcomes and augmenting the quality of the outcome. And then they both will interact to improve citizen level outcomes. Then we also determined that some of them may be the ones that we may not be able to measure after we withdraw from the state. So like adoption of nutrition sensitive behaviors of the households, or improved nutrition outcomes, motivation of frontline workers to perform well. These we don't know how long they will take to realize.
Sorry,
Yeah.
so Parul, one point, and this is, I'm just bringing this up because even I feel myself getting sort of carried away by the whole MEL framework, right? Now, this is a framework that judges the success of an intervention. It doesn't judge the success of your project. You've completed your project, your intervention has no outcomes, visible outcomes. Does that mean your project has failed? Or does that mean the intervention's failed? We have to distinguish between these two things. That's going to be very important, especially if we use this metric to judge the performance of individuals within the organization.
So after we did this, sorry Santosh, I'll just cover the next two ones and then we can take questions. Then we also thought of how it's going to influence, the state capacity, right? So the state capacity was another column in the table Praveen presented, and like it's a very hazy definition. Like at least to me, it's not very clear what we mean by state capacity. It can't be that you made the intervention happen at that point. The intervention needs to sustain. And what could be some of the potential indicators of that sustenance is that your functionaries understand the interventions, right? And they are willing to adopt the interventions in terms of the time they spend on them, they have the required competency to deliver the interventions, and they have the willingness to deliver the interventions. And this willingness part is very important because otherwise it won't sustain. If they won't have somebody, monitoring all through, this will die down. The second element of state capacity could be the technical and physical infrastructure, that the department does not have any external dependency once we withdraw. There is enough of that technical and physical infrastructure available with the department to take this forward. So that could be another element of state capacity. The third is all the relevant SOPs, technical documents, etc. that they can refer to, so that knowledge transfer is easier when somebody transitions out or any kind of change happens within the department. And department has all the tools to also monitor the progress and troubleshoot appropriately. Otherwise, if we stop monitoring and then government also stops monitoring, then it will go back to the same system.
I couldn't resist.
No, I need the mic because
You can just join us.
I think I need to make a couple of important interventions here because this is exactly why this is being thrown out, because I think here all four are probably slightly wrong. Okay.
No, that's good to know that.
No, exactly. Right? And I think I think there is this old idea of sustainability and state capacity being interpreted as, can the government carry out the intervention after we have left? That is a traditional understanding of we have created state capacity. And I think that's a mistake. That's a mistake in the following sense, because that way of thinking applies to interventions. We are talking systems. So I think a better way of defining state capacity is the foundations of our theory of change, which is, are data systems working better where I trust the data? So that is one by itself measure of state capacity. Are the personnel better equipped to do their job? And do we have in place performance measurement management systems that feed back into how personnel function? And budgets, again, there are two aspects, Are we allocating budgets based on, have we improved the allocation of budget to reflect cost effectiveness? And from a Santosh Matthew fund flow perspective, have we improved the plumbing of the fund? So even in public finance, for example, for CEGIS, there are three fundamental focus areas. There is revenue, there is quality of expenditure, which is basically defined as reallocating funds from less effective to more effective things, and there is the process of expenditure. So all those three things are core aspects of state capacity. So all of this is defined around intervention sustainability, which is kind of how I'm seeing this, whereas we are playing one level higher, at a system change level, and those would be the metrics of state capacity. And then eventually, even federalism, if you come back to the chapters, So you are augmenting state capacity if you have actually implemented this principle of greater autonomy and process and accountability for outcomes, which requires kind of architecting how we function across levels of government, So again, in BTC, we're seeing autonomy hai, capacity nahi hai, And that's also chicken and egg. Chicken and egg because people don't give autonomy because they say capacity nahi hai. But you don't develop capacity because you have no use for the capacity. So that is a really, really difficult problem. right? But that's why there's a federalism chapter in the book, and that again is a way of thinking about state capacity, state and market, right? So what are we doing on procurement? Are we kind of improving the processes by which that happens? So long term, when you want to define state capacity, I think it's useful to go back to those building blocks of how we have defined it. Whereas these things, for example, is very much about, is your intervention sustainable, right? I mean that the functionaries at all levels have understood ke karna kya hai. Now, eventually these things combine in the sense that just having data is not enough if they don't know how to use the data. Fair enough, right? But when we say state capacity, it is those three pillars again, right?
Sorry. No, Karthik, so then a question, a follow-up on that. Should we then drop citizen level outcomes entirely from our success?
No, I think that is the eventual goal, right? Second, see, these are not mutually exclusive, right? I mean, so here's my simple point. If you try to fit every project into the same this thing, so that's where the judgment comes, right? So for PM people, I'm not going to ask you to show citizen level impact right now, right? Because there the primary unit of impact is the functionary, is the government employee, right? Do they feel more empowered? Do they feel more capable? Do they feel that their time is being spent better? Do they feel that there is not just capacity to learn but rewards in the system for learning? Okay, so there's a whole bunch of outcomes for PM that if you define at the personal level is good enough, okay? For OM, similarly, when we talk about these data systems, right? So if you put in place an HFM that you're able to then create some of these high frequency visibility, ADI, KPI, right? So those are system level things. Now, I think the citizen level stuff, the challenge is that in some sectors, so this as CEGIS overall, if we have delivered this, we have done most of our work, okay? But it is also possible in some cases to validate that this has reached all the way down to the citizen. So in the case of say ICDS, if we say strategic budgeting of public finance tells us that it is cost effective to put the extra worker, we believe that that should be enough of an intervention to actually improve outcomes. So in that case, looking at citizen outcomes would make sense. So that's not something in revenue. We won't look for, in revenue the citizen level outcome will be the opposite, which is was there increase in harassment of the citizen, right? I mean, so eventually you could do something like that. But yes, I think it's perfectly fine to focus most of the goals at the systems level along those metrics. But in some projects, there will be a transmission down to the citizen, which in ECB is possible.
No, but here, like, we are already defining system level, functionary level, and citizen level, right? I mean, and then we are, so are we saying that with this itself, you have achieved state capacity, or you are measuring state capacity, or do we need additional matrix?
So basically, like how we were understanding this is that first define outcomes.
I'm reacting to the other slide.
Yeah.
Because that came after that.
It came after. Got it.
No, but the point here is, Parul, exactly what he said, right? So the citizen level outcomes only materialize in certain, let's say,
That's
social
fine.
policy.
Yeah,
So
that's okay.
because we've taken ECD as an example, I think that's why this matters.
Exactly.
But from the
I'm saying
group,
the outcomes you were measuring, you were talking about, they are already covered under system level and functional,
Correct.
right? So like robust data systems, better quality data, or time efficiency, workflow management.
Got it. No, I think I was just reacting to the way state capacity was defined in the next
correct,
slide,
correct.
right? And
So
that's
you're
right.
saying that should be defined, I mean that is taken care of here itself, you don't need to
Because there it felt like you had defined state capacity as the ability to
Correct.
implement this intervention at scale.
Correct.
Now, I think the one thing which I am open to kind of thinking as we think about the role of CEGIS, even if it takes a permanent presence, okay, of a CEGIS team of 10 or 20 people, to drive the remaining 2 lakh folks in the government to function more efficiently, that is a perfectly justified permanent presence. Okay, so the government of China, like the most important part of the Chinese government, is the performance management division that is incredibly khufia. Okay, कोई किसी को पता नहीं लेकिन क्या करते हैं, but सबको डर है, right? Because they do their own 360 degree some measurements, some other thing, but that is a permanent presence. Okay, so I don't think we need to think about state capacity as can they do it all by themselves. No, is if we are there as a force multiplier that is making the system work better, but that is already different from how most other NGOs think, right? They're like, okay, ये हमारा program चलाना है, right? ये हमारा program है और program चलाने को, then sustainability is can the government run the program by themselves, correct? And so that's the difference between systems thinking and programmatic thinking, right? Because we are doing systems thinking, but it's completely fine. See, if you think about public finance, in steady state, every state should have a chief economic advisor's office, that is able to do economic analysis of proposed policies, that's able to look at the budget and saying here is, incidents, all of the kind of things we've talked about, right? And that it's perfectly fine to need a little bit of a permanent presence, but that's a presence that's functioning in a very, very strategic way that improves the functioning of the rest of the state, right?
Yeah. Also, this slide, I think what this is trying to do is nudge the projects to also think of these indicators. Like, you also should be trying to see whether it will sustain beyond. So, is there any information you should be collecting about, are people understanding, are people getting to engage with the data, things like that?
Fair enough. Like, so for
But
something
we
like
shouldn't define it as
It's
data
not capacity,
That-
it's
exactly.
just, it's.
That is why I jumped.
Yes,
Like,
yes,
no,
yes.
no, because it's important, right? Because it's an iterative process, and so when we're defining these things,
Yeah. No, that's an important.
Keep it up.
Yeah, you should take it with it.
That's also, I think, an important stage just for the group activity, right? Now, if you're looking at defining the success of certain projects, depending on the nature of projects that you select, I think those indicators would completely differ. If you're doing something which is internal facing, systems level, functionary level, like Karthik said, there is no reason for you to even consider citizen level outcomes as a success measure. So when you're actually looking to build out these projects and understand what could be success at the end of 1 year, 2 year, whatever, just keep that in mind that not every project will have an impact on everything.
So just apart from the outcomes, there are always certain success indicators that can tell you if your project is working or not, right? Like at the remaining 3 levels from the table Praveen was presenting. So for CEGIS, like implications on reduction in time and effort, like in doing certain things, right? So what we are seeing, for instance, is system diagnostic, which took, I already gave that example. It's like we are being more efficient about it. Supportive supervision app, like which is already designed for Telangana, we are now doing it more efficiently, say within a month or 2 for Bodoland. So these are also the learnings or outcomes at an org level that we are templatizing our solutions in a certain way. And I think one thing which is not mentioned here is like, based on this experience, if we are being called in by a health department or education department in Telangana to do similar work there, I think that's also a success indicator, which we didn't list out here. Then conscious measurement, like if we can institutionalize this, KM is back.
Parul gets scared every time you stand up.
Then the development ecosystem, which is essentially the ecosystem we are working in. If it is basically the cross-learning and knowledge sharing that is happening with that ecosystem, right? So in case of ECD, we are doing a lot of knowledge sharing with CSF, with IFPRI, with Antara Foundation, and doing it consciously so that we are learning from each other, right? Even if Antara is doing their work in health, we are learning, like we are taking their learnings to apply to WCD, and our learnings, they are on supportive supervision, they are trying to apply to health. Then on economy, like it's a long shot, but based on Karthik's work on two-worker model, like this can be calculated based on what he was saying earlier in the session, that it is possible to, understand the longer-term population health outcomes because of the improvement in malnourishment in the state. So once you have identified, your outcomes, so we are just at the second stage. You identified your goals, your work streams, your outcomes. Now you are creating those pathways, right? So you know what work streams there are, you figure out the activities, and you figure out what inputs are required from the CEGIS end and from the government end, and if there is another partner, then from their end. And throughout this process between work stream and inputs, you also try to do some, cost analysis, like how much is it going to cost to actually make these things work at the pilot stage and also at scale.
So again,
Sorry.
Again here, the cost element is far more salient for a programmatic intervention, right? Internal interventions, the cost may be utterly negligible or at least not something that you have to bear or the government has to bear. Right? If, for instance, it may be time cost, you may want to quantify that, but for instance, if you're doing some sort of a, capacity building training, for instance, right? The time cost of employees is the only thing that is really being spent there. There's no material cost, there's no intervention cost. So the cost here, distinguishing between external facing programmatic versus internal facing administrative versus internal facing systems, these 3 kinds of projects will have to be differentiated between so that you can sort of get a sense of how do you measure the success.
Yeah, and then you define your outputs, which is essentially as soon as you intervene, what is it that you are getting out of it? And then you do your outcomes again at 3 levels, systems, functionary and citizen, and also like intermediate outcomes, longer term outcomes, and then impact. right? Here we broke it down by 6, 12, 18, but the time frame could vary by project to project. This is just indicative. But all through, when you figure out your inputs, outputs, outcomes, you have to be cognizant of the assumptions you are making while doing your log frame and the risks. What is it that could go wrong, and how would you, correct for it? What is plan B? You should be aware of that. And all this needs to be documented. Workstation gives you the template. Please use it and try and figure this out. We are here to help. I mean, that's what OM team can definitely do. We can clarify what output could be and what the risk could be, etc. So what are we measuring in a project, right? So we are measuring processes. We are measuring, which is basically related to, say, how something is getting conducted, how people are reacting to your interventions, what is the qualitative feedback. It could be mostly qualitative, but basically understanding the process that Ganesh was also talking about, mostly monitoring, right? You're measuring output, that is what is the immediate output of your intervention in terms of physical, financial output, or even again qualitative output, perceptions, etc. Then comes the outcome, which is behavioral awareness levels, or change in the quality of data, and then your impact, which is in case of ECD will be citizen level outcomes like malnourishment and all. But while measuring all these levels, we'll have to be careful about some of the pointers, right? So in case of process, you don't necessarily need your sample to be representative, right? For a process, you need to capture the variation. You need to understand how many ever scenarios are possible, and how do you ensure that you are capturing all of those, so that you know if your intervention will work and in which scenarios it will work and in which scenarios it may fail. So here you are, when it comes to sampling, you're mostly talking about variation. Frequency, you have to think about, like it should be basically institutionalized, so it should be as frequently as possible. If you get monthly data or quarterly data, or if your field team is deployed at that frequency, then that kind of data, the higher the frequency of this data, the better. And then how it basically feeds the results back into your project, right? That is the objective of doing the process evaluation. Then at the output level, you need to make sure that the outputs are realistic and achievable, they are action oriented, and they again feed back into the design of your program.
Is there in that slide?
And then outcome level, again, like here, when you measure your outcome or your impact, you will have to ensure that your sample is representative, right? Like here is where you need a representative sample as compared to what you were doing in your process evaluation. So this is like a quick glimpse of how we did. Sorry, this is done.
What is that?
Yeah. So this is just an example of how we did the log frame for one of the work streams on ECD project, right? We did this in log workstation, so it's possible, it's feasible. We tested it. Basically, so intervention is essentially our mobile application, which contains different modules to guide stakeholders during their field visits and supervision. And then inputs are essentially all the different activities that you conduct. And we figured out what is it that we need from government, and mission inputs are what we are inserting into it, and outputs again is what you're getting out of it, like the functional mobile application and the increase in number of supervision. Sorry, that is outcome. So that should be moved here. And then we defined outcomes again, as I said, like at 3 levels: intermediate, long-term, and impact. We can share the slides and you can go through it as to how we did.
We will be after this.
Yeah. Okay. And then the additional success indicators for CEGIS government and development ecosystem, we defined those as well, right? Here we were not very confident about allocating a timeline to it, because we don't know when we'll achieve this. It could be now, or it could be later in the future, but we are mindful that such things may happen and we should measure them. So there is this conscious effort of keeping track of these items. So based on all this that we want to measure, we came up with the potential data sources. Now we have identified 4 data sources for our ECD mission. One is this administrative data that we'll have access to from the department, and what it will tell us is the uptake and usage of our interventions. It will tell us the effectiveness of our interventions when the quality of data improves, right? So administrative data analysis is something that we'll keep doing all through the project and even after we stop our interventions or we withdraw and hand over to the government. So this is quite an important piece, and I think our teams should have basic training in doing this basic kind of analysis to figure out where we are. The second source of data for us is process evaluation, which we want to do as part of ECD mission, which will be run in 60 projects to understand how the interventions are running, monitoring the execution, course correcting our interventions as we go, because I mean, while there will be an impact evaluation going alongside, it doesn't mean you can't course correct your interventions, right? So that is why it's a little different from the standard RCTs. And then we will also, through the process evaluation, we will gather a lot of feedback from functionaries at all levels to understand what is the perceived and realized kind of value of the interventions with these people. We are also planning to conduct a time use survey, which is going to be with a limited set of people. Again, here you don't need a representative sample. You just need to make sure it's a qualitative exercise. You need to make sure that you're covering enough numbers. So here we plan to do it with 30 Anganwadi centers, and we'll follow Stallings approach, Stallings methodology that Karthik and team also used during the RCT of additional worker. But there they did it for just 2 hours of preschool. Here we want to do it for all through the duration that the Anganwadi worker operates. So 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. is when an observer will sit out of the Anganwadi center and record observations every 6 minutes. We piloted it in 5 Anganwadi centers. We know the methodology works. It's really tricky because you need good quality people. So we are trying to figure out how to execute it when we do the ECD mission. But it is an important indicator for us, right? Any intervention we do at functionary level, we want to see if we are building in that, bringing in the time efficiency in workflow management. I'm almost so that can be measured only if you do it this way. And we also, so we all know that Anganwadi workers do multiple activities, right? What a 6-minute observation will tell you is if there is multitasking happening within a particular bracket, and what level of multitasking. Are they doing 2 things at a time, 3 things at a time? And if along, say, cooking, they are also doing teaching, then you know that the quality of teaching is compromised, right? Or if they are disciplining kids and doing growth monitoring, again, you know the quality of growth monitoring is getting compromised. So that is the level at which we want to do time use survey. Then we want to also do an impact evaluation in collaboration with JPAL, and we are also discussing the possibilities with Ajinkya and Karthik Srivastava to see how we can do the design. So far what we have in mind is we'll have 60 ICDS projects identified. Sorry, I broke this. So 60 ICDS projects, we'll split them into treatment and control groups. The treatment group will receive the bundle of ECD mission. Like, we are not testing one intervention in particular. It will receive all the interventions that we have designed under ECD mission, because we believe that things may not work in isolation. It will have to come in as a bundle. And then what we'll do is, after that, then we'll do sector level randomization to test out, to do a lot of mini experiments, right? To see what kind of communication strategies resonate well with supervisors or with CDPOs, who are the decision makers, right? Because once you have created a lot of data, a lot of good quality admin data, how it can get used within the system is an important question. And nobody has answer to that question. Everybody says dashboard bana do. But people may not understand dashboard, people may not understand graphs, right? People may not even understand the interpretation that you do out of it. And interpretation you can't do in a sustained manner, right? Like what if you go away, they will have to interpret it themselves, because it's dynamic enough. So what kind of nudges to provide, etc. We want to really experiment with that bit at the sector level, using sector level mini experiments. Yeah.
And Parul,
yes,
sorry, no, now I'm empowered with the mic. No, so I want to say 2 things, right? See, one is, I don't want people to get scared, okay, by this, because this obviously this is a full-blown RCT, okay? So this is something that will be done in partnership with academic researchers, and it only makes sense because the project itself is at a mature enough level that we kind of want to be able to test it, okay? But there is an opportunity here for this
CLOP team, okay, just based on what Parul just said, that you know, we don't even know if the workers know how to interpret the data, okay. So in a setting like this, if there's a little bit of diagnostic work that comes from this level of field work that says, listen, they don't understand this, then that's an instant opportunity for a mini RCT that says, here is a training module, like that is going to focus on data interpretation, data understanding for these workers, and so you do that, and then that becomes very quick to test, and you're not even randomizing in the sense of denying anybody, right? You'll just phase it out. So you'll say, okay, if here's first phase, second phase, third phase, then you just do a simple test, and at least you got an immediate measure of knowledge, and then you can do a test of retention, okay, like 3 months later we'll go and measure. So one thing is, while it does seem very onerous, right? I mean, to put on kind of this researcher hat, I think here's I think a way to make a case for and push back against something Siddharth said, though he's nodding on this piece, right?
I don't have a mic.
But by now you're empowered to shake your head at what I'm saying, right? And I react to that. I react to body language. So no, I think this is the point, right? If you look at what the truly cutting edge companies in the world are doing, okay, an Amazon or a Google, I mean, these guys are running tens of thousands of micro A/B experiments every single year, okay. And so the point is, the old style of decision making, like I think Dr. Bono was saying, right? I mean, so in government, or even in private sector, okay, but particularly in government, you follow the Hippo principle, right? I mean, and what is the Hippo principle? The highest paid person's opinion, okay? So basically, like, so you are sitting there, and even today, like in the review meeting, everybody around secretary, yes sir, yes sir, yes sir, yes sir, yes sir. Like, it's like lemmings, okay? It's like unbelievable, right?
So I agree, I completely agree. It is disgraceful.
Okay, so the point is, right, like, and when we come back to research and come back to ideas, right? It is, so I've said this and people have used this back, but it's true, right? I mean, and that's why I encourage people to push back against me. Like, that the difference between government and academia, and Larry Summers said this nicely, because he had been Treasury Secretary and then he came to be President of Harvard, and it was much harder job being President of Harvard, right? Like, he lost his job, but that's a separate story. But basically, he understood this was difficult, okay? He understood this was difficult, because I remember when he came, he said something very interesting. He said, being in government is all about the idea of authority, right? Whereas being in the university is all about the authority of ideas, right? So it doesn't matter who you are, right? Like, what matters is, does your idea make sense? Okay, so, but then, see, if the young person, the old person both only have opinions, then the old person does get some sort of experience ka weight milta hai, okay? But how does the young person convince the older person? Data dikhao, right? Like, so then when you actually have the evidence, and again, like Dr. Bono said, it's the data and the evidence that shifts the conversation. So today, we were in this, it was a meeting with the food secretary of a project on choice-based DBT that we've been pushing for a long time. And bottom line is, this is something we have debated for 25 years till the cows come home. Okay, so at some point you have to test it and get data, and secretary immediately understood that being the part of the data. Okay, so one thing I want to push you guys to do, and over time, I mean, we have to figure out a way of building a really robust tech layer, okay, like in CEGIS and what we do, okay. Think about the global misallocation of talent, that an Amazon today employs over 1,000 PhDs in one company, okay. Over 200 PhDs in economics, okay. Over 800 PhDs in computer science, machine learning, AI, whatever, and industrial engineering. And these guys are applying the most cutting edge tools to improve the delivery time of packages by 2 minutes, okay. So think about how much more improvement in global welfare there would be if you brought that kind of horsepower into the functioning of the government and the scale at which the government functions. So I don't want you to take the message from the RCT, अरे यार ये तो researcher करते हैं, हमको थोपते हैं, हमको तो हम development वाले हम project करते हैं. No, it is because here's the important point to remember: 90% of the cost and the effort of a RCT is the outcome data. So if you can automate the outcome data, that is what allows you to run A/B tests, okay, at a much lower cost. So we don't need to do this for publication, okay, but as a PM team, okay, so you don't need to say it's going to take me 5 years, no, because if you're saying that one of your use cases is going to be Anganwadi workers, ability to kind of do their job, frontline work better. And part of what they need to be able to do is interpret a growth chart, be able to do certain basic things. So if you then figure out competence mapping हो जाएगा, content creation हो जाएगा, modular training भी हो जाएगा, how difficult is it to then quantify the impact of that by saying, okay, we're going to train thousands of these workers over time, we'll do some prototyping, we'll do some testing, we'll do some pre-post to see is this working, and then once you've kind of refined your model, then it's easy to say, okay, we're going to phase out the training. And as part of any training exercise, you do an initial assessment of saying, how well are you doing? And then you do this, you phase it out, you test it, and then 3 months later you can test for retention. So this kind of builds a certain discipline of demanding data in all of your work. Okay? So yes, there will be few high level RCTs like impact of an early childhood development mission, testing components, putting the extra worker, that will require very, very careful citizen level outcome measurement, right? So that won't happen everywhere.
Yeah.
So this is excellent. So I wanted to intervene both so that you don't get scared by the complexity of this thing. And I remember, one of our ex-colleagues was very scared, and he said, okay, they're building CEGIS and not CERIS. Okay, he was scared they were building a Center for Effective Research on Indian States. So he was like, but the point is that you've got to be a learning out, and the learning is in multiple ways. And coming back to Siddharth's point, right? See, the point secretary Bush network is basically a variant of Hippo, right? Like, एक Hippo, दूसरे Hippo को पूछेगा, अपने batch वाले Hippo को पूछेगा. So there is also parity among Hippos, right? And then पूछ के, we'll figure out, and then, okay, at least you have some Hippo group think, okay, to say करना है नहीं, okay? But that is still only at the level of 4-5 Hippo के group think, right? Like, you still need the data about what's working. Okay, so this is.
No,
sorry,
Karthik,
those
also.
who are getting scared with RCT, MicroMaster.
Vijay has been canvassing it everywhere.
Yes, around that room I saw many people are saying it is technical and all that. एक बार वो CEGIS sponsor कर रहा है उसको.
अब तो कर लो.
कर लो, बहुत I can understand at least terminology. करना हो जाए वो थोड़ा सा मुश्किल होगा, उसकी एक्सप्लेन पड़ेगा. समझ रहा हूँ क्या चल रहा है.
No, actually, Karthik, sometimes we don't know what's going to work, right? So A/B testing is not just about training. It could be training plus, say, a certain format, right?
Exactly.
So you start with format, you add the training, you see the
So the whole
incremental
point of
impact,
A/B
right?
testing is that iteratively you just keep tinkering, but instead of tinkering and taking impressionist feedback, you take. So here's a simple point. Okay, let's think about you're a branding guy. Okay, let's think about marketing campaign. And marketing was a classic case of Hippo, right? Like basically room में बैठेंगे ad agents.
Complete to A/B test.
Huh? It has moved completely, right? So in 10 years, the entire discipline has changed in 10 years. Completely changed.
Yeah.
Entirely changed, right? Because उसके पहले marketing was your textbook case of a Hippo phenomenon, right? I mean, CEO बैठेगा, ad agency आएंगे, ये दिखाओ, ये अच्छा लगता है. That's it.
Hopefully experience had something.
Exactly. So correct. So I'm not denying that Hippo deserves some gradient, right? Like for the experience.
So Karthik, sorry, just a couple of clarificatory questions. Yes, please.
Question piece that Arun covered earlier. This every 6 minutes observation. What is our understanding of the observer effect, of the observed effect?
Yeah, great question. And so basically what happens is what we've seen in these things. Sorry, sir. Because this is a research level of measurement.
I'll also hear.
It's there.
Huh?
It's there in that course.
It all comes down.
I need to send it to Esther Duflo personally. No, because this is why Esther put in the effort. And where is the CELOP kind of comms dissemination team? This is what I need to do with the book and have that. So Esther का असर वहाँ पे विजय को पड़ रहा है. तो यहाँ से 4 levels down in the government of UP, we need our effect to be seen. But that's the effect.
JPAL comms team also will be very happy to hear.
Yeah, JPAL comms team will be very happy.
We'll get him to meet John Ray or something like that to get the other point of view.
Yeah, it's essential.
But John and Esther work together in Tamil Nadu CMAC.
But on this observed effect.
Correct. So I think basically what happens is, because the treatment and control are getting the identical observation protocol, whatever Hawthorne effect is there is the same for everybody. So that is the logic of why we don't worry too much about that. Now there's another set of studies that shows for the first half per day, people's behavior changes. After that, it's very hard to fake your behavior too long. Okay, and even when you fake it, there is still huge variation in kind of what people actually do. So you're right, but for the experimental study, it gets different stuff.
So Karthik, on the A/B testing, we had 2 questions. One is that, as you say, tinkering. Now, in order to do that, do we not then have to wait till we have a relatively established model which is now in the institutionalized phase?
where we then sort of try and improve it as we go along, rather than starting with A/B testing, where we completely unsure of even this fundamental.
No, exactly. Right? I mean, I think, see, you go in with a broad concept, right?
Yeah.
I mean, ye sab karne hain, that concept goes in. But I think the deeper point I want to highlight is the value of designing systems that give you high frequency data. Okay? Because if you have the data, it makes it sharply reduces the cost of the testing.
Yeah, that's one of the things we've been talking about here as well, right? Like so much of.
Sorry?
And insulates us from a lot of different problems.
Let's break, Parul. We'll come back into that.
Exactly, Commissioner, system.
We are saying that throughout the cycle or the different stages of the project, so let's say design prototype stage, then you are testing it at scale, and then you are scaling up or handing over to the department. Like you can, all through this process, you can deploy different M&E methods to keep measuring and keep collecting data about your performance, right? So for instance, in case of design and prototyping, do a lot of admin data checks, keep doing process evaluation whenever you find an opportunity. When you're testing at scale, you can deploy all the different methods, right? Like we are doing impact evaluation, time use survey, including process evaluation and all. And then even when you scale up and hand over to the department, it's important that you monitor the process, you know, like not as rigorously as you were doing in the first two stages, but some sort of process monitoring has to happen, and troubleshooting wherever required, and admin data checks and analysis, so that you can measure the longer term impacts of your intervention even after you have withdrawn, and if we don't do like a longer term survey data.
Yeah, just to add to that, like another thing which is super, I don't know, it kind of differentiates us is I think we get access to so much admin data, right? So if you could, like, basic message is that we don't always need surveys to keep collecting data. If we can somehow embed even like 2 indicators, 3 indicators in something that the government is already doing, you start getting that data, and like that's way more cost effective than us coming up with new things. Now today we'll do time use, today we'll start this survey.
Yeah, and here, like in this case, admin data quality in itself is a work stream, one of the components. So it makes all the more sense to just use that data and do all your analysis, right? You won't be able to do much of a lot of the household level things like dietary diversity, etc., for which we can deploy a survey. But beyond that, you will have a good quality admin data after a point that can be used, right? So
in 9 out of 10 cases, the government will not permit you to do this survey. Be cognizant.
Yeah, very quickly. So the framework that Praveen had displayed earlier about measuring ROI, we tried to figure out what cells, and this is I think what the groups will have to do, right? What cells are relevant to your projects, your identified projects, and do you know if they are negatives or positives, or do you not know yet, and like the data will tell you, right? So it's in the amber. So we just picked the indicators that were relevant to us, relevant to the ECD project, and just tried to color code the cells depending on the level at which they were important. So cash outflows will apply to CEGIS and government. Time value of money is primarily on the citizens. Resource utilization, we don't know which way it will go, but it will be primarily at the system and functionality level. So this way we conducted this exercise, and then as we go and we measure, we should be able to come up with some measure of ROI as to where we stand. It won't be solid enough, but some combination of qualitative and quantitative numbers should get us somewhere. Yeah, I'll just close. Praveen?
Should I introduce the groups? I won't stand up. So group work is relatively, it's not simple really, but it's unstructured to a large degree. Now what we wanted to do, like we said earlier, I think we've broken you guys into 3 teams. What we want to do is for each team to pick, I think, 2 or 3 projects. These projects can be across the board, can be any project that CEGIS has done, not done. Of course, it has to be largely within the realm of what CEGIS tries to do. It can't be something entirely different. But nevertheless, you have the freedom to pick these projects. Essentially using the system, functionary, and whatever the beneficiary level outcomes, plus the framework that Praveen has created, you are required to give us a sense of what success will look like a year from now. What are the outcomes that you anticipate? What are the risks that you anticipate? You don't have to write everything down on your slides, and we want you to do slides. We don't want you to do chart papers which nobody ever collects after that. We want you to do slides. It can be 5 slides, 10 slides, 1 slide, it doesn't really matter. The point is that you have to put all of this on a slide and be able to defend what you're saying as to why a certain outcome will or will not be relevant. Right. So the teams are here, and the reason we've done this is basically to reduce the load on some of the senior people, and also because we want to make sure that everybody actually participates in this and does not defer to, like Karthik said, the hippos. So in that sense, I think what we try the state lead, vertical lead, you can pick whatever, it doesn't really matter. But the point is that all of these becomes a team. We have one assigned mentor to each team. The idea is not to depend on them, but to ask any clarificatory questions. There are what we are calling sector coordinators. So if you want, for instance, to, and we urge you to pick projects at least across 2 or 3 sectors, and not just restrict yourself to one. You guys are free to sort of pick the sector that you want, but I suppose Bhanu would definitely be revenue, and then Naveen would be, I don't know, PRRD, and then Stephen will be, education we are Ramnath already. So Stephen will be agriculture, let's say, and so on and so forth. And then of course, there are also sort of leadership people, Karthik, Vijay included, who you can reach out. Sorry?
Yes,
Right, of course. I mean, we didn't include his name, but of course, all of these people are available to you in case you have any high-level questions. But by and large, to the extent, and this is again, so one final point that I want to make, and which I spoke about earlier, we will talk about project-level metrics, and that's what you've been given. But there should ideally be a concluding slide about how the org is likely to succeed as a result of these 3 or 4 projects. So imagine you're starting an engagement today. You're deciding which projects you want to pick, why you want to pick them, what are the successes on those projects likely to look at, at the end of a year, and how will that all contribute to your unit level success. Let's call it the state level success, or whatever you want to call it. We'll leave this here, we'll send across the slides to you.
Can you explain the roles before?
It's irrelevant. I mean, the point is that I've just given it so that we have a flavor of all the.
There is one more
No.
thing we are
So logistics. So logistics, few things. So the SL row, Santosh, Naresh, Hari, they have been sent the slides also, like just what we use till now. So in case the group needs access to like what has been done, you want some ideas or just the templates, you can please use it. We have time till 5.
No, so a little bit revision can be there. So it's almost 4:30 now. Okay. So 5:15 we should come back. Tea time and all that, like if you assemble in these groups and start discussing, it will be good. So let's utilize tea time also. But yeah, 5:15 we should come back, and then 15 minutes each. So 6 o'clock we should be able to do that, and then Karthik's session can start around 6. So our later program also doesn't get delayed. That is very important, correct? So lot of arrangements are there after
the most important program
and very important program. So that also please be conscious, because it's for that larger goal. we should stick to this time limit.
Sorry. So just one point. I think what Ganesh and Paul were saying. The idea of giving 2 SPMs is to say that at least 2 projects are to pick, 1 per SPM, possibly 3. The state lead is relatively just the senior most people that I could recognize was sort of there. The state lead and vertical lead is how I split it, because they seem to be of roughly the same seniority. But it's a flat organization. It's not to say that Santosh will decide for the group or Hari will decide. That's certainly not the case. I just sort of organized it in the manner or in the order in which I recognize the names, most of which I didn't. There are certain names here which are missing, but there are people in the room who are there. They can feel free to add themselves to whichever group. They can check in with the state lead or the mentor or whoever.
But they have to add themselves to some group.
Some group, yeah. And then, like I said, we need to put together some slides. Everybody has at least 1 laptop between them. So that's the idea that you have to give it. 5 slides in about 45 minutes, and then about 10 minutes per person or 5 minutes per person to present them. I will be grilling.
But it's very high level because it's very hard to do, right? Like you can't really do a log frame for a project in 45 minutes. It may take 45 days. Just give it your shot. Like at least the larger framework, the idea is that gets implemented.
It is just as important to note what you absolutely could not do. That is actually more important. To note what doesn't make any sense at all.
Let's get going.
Yes. Sorry, just one small thing. Like, thanks a lot to Suramya for putting together a lot of the slides used today.
Yeah. Thank you, Suramya.